Well, today is the 52nd birthday of Humanae Vitae, which came out on July 25th, 1968. It's the encyclical that got Pope Paul VI, who's now a saint, in so much trouble, and how he has been vindicated as a prophet. Now, Catholic magisterial documents are known by their opening phrase in Latin. So, Humanae Vitae in the original document, which is only 31 paragraphs long, means of human life. So whenever you see a Catholic document or a papal apostolic exhortation, something like that, they're often called by their Latin title. Now, Latin is the mother tongue, the official language of the Catholic Church, so that part makes sense. Now, Humanae Vitae was released at a very turbulent time in Catholic history. It was 1968. It was the culmination, you could say, of all the crazy 60s enthusiasms. It was the beginning of the porn industry. The birth control pill had been approved by the FDA in 1960, called Enovid. So in this first video, it's one of three I'm going to do to explain this teaching. I want to provide the context in history of when it was released and why it was rejected. Let's back up a little bit to 1930. Before 1930, every Christian denomination agreed with the Catholic Church that sexual intercourse in marriage must be connected to the possibility of children. So there's an organic uniting between the sex act and the primary end of the sex act. Every 10th grade biology student can tell you that the purpose of sex is procreation. It's for babies. That's the primary end. But it's also for bonding. It's also for the unity of the couple. And every Christian agreed with this. If you read the writings of Zwingli or Knox or John Calvin, Martin Luther, they were very, very opposed to birth control. Now, the phrase birth control is not used by the magisterium or the teaching office of the Catholic Church because birth control is a slogan that was made popular in the 1920s and 19-teens by Margaret Sanger, the racist eugenicist foundress of Planned Parenthood. The original name of Planned Parenthood was the Birth Control League, the American Birth Control League. So the term birth control is kind of misleading. Chesterton, the great English writer, said that birth control means no birth and no control. So the preferred phrase for understanding what it really means is contraception. It's built right into the word. Contra meaning against. We see this in the word contradict, which means against the word. In this case, against the inception, against the beginning. That's what contraception means. And the reason why contraception is wrong is not only for biblical reasons, which we're going to review in just a moment, but in this first video, I want to provide an angle on contraception you may not have heard before. And the reason contraception is wrong is that it thwarts, undermines, tampers with, negates, maybe the best word is sterilizes what God has made a fertile act. That's what contraception does. It's sex plus something else designed to kill off, so to speak, the possibility of its natural consequence, namely a baby. Now look at the language we use to describe contraception. We call it protection, using protection. If I'm in the Arctic, I need protection. I need electric long johns. I need a bunch of layers. I need a parka. I need, at least a tent or a building, something to keep me warm, because I need to be protected from the cold, which could kill me. The cold in the Arctic or in Antarctica is my enemy because it can kill me. If I go to war, I need the protection of my fellow soldiers. If I'm a cop, I need the protection of, say, a bulletproof vest. So what's the enemy here in contraception? Why is contraception called protection? Because you're protecting yourself, you and the woman you are having sex with. You're protecting yourself and selves from what? A new human life. That's what contracepting couples protect themselves against. A helpless, innocent baby. This is part of the reason why the answer to the abortion scourge is not better birth control. It's no birth control. From Sweden to the Netherlands to Canada to the United States, every country that since the 1960s has accepted contraception as normal, as good, as a blessing in some way, sooner or later, within a matter of years, every circumstance leads to abortion. Now, in the United States, after Enovid, the first birth control, was approved by the FDA in 1960, there began a bunch of pressure building upon Paul VI to change the teaching. Because this birth control pill worked invisibly. It worked chemically, as it were, to fool the woman's body into thinking that she was pregnant so that it would inhibit ovulation. Or, if that didn't work, it would create a situation where the sperm could fertilize, conception could happen, and then the tiny developing baby would not be able to implant on the inner wall of the uterus. And the baby would be sloughed out through an artificially induced miscarriage. That's another way that the birth control pill works. So this pressure began to build on the Pope to change the teaching. And it wasn't until 1968 that he got around to releasing Humanae Vitae. I personally think he probably could have done it and maybe should have done it earlier than that. I think the teaching would have been accepted if it had been released at the time of the Second Vatican Council. But in 1965, so this is 3 years before Humanae Vitae is released, the Second Vatican Council ends. Catholics are confused about the relationship between the church and the world. Catholics recalibrate the relationship to the church. You have tens of thousands of priests and nuns leaving the church. It's a very tumultuous time. 3 years later, Humanae Vitae is released. Went off like a stink bomb. The wrong message at the wrong time to the wrong crowd. In 1965, the best film Oscar went to The Sound of Music. By 1969, 4 years later, only 1 year after Humanae Vitae was released, the best picture Oscar went to Midnight Cowboy, about a drug-addicted drifter, prostitute, the first rated X film to win an Academy Award. By that time, pornography in mainstream theaters was common. The Devil and Miss Jones, Deep Throat, I Am Curious Yellow. Pubic hair made its debut in Penthouse magazine, and there was a race on to out-explicitize, out-perverse the other pornographers. The sexual revolution left second gear into third gear, and we were off to the races. So between 1965 to 1969, you have this explosion of pornographic content. Also on Broadway, by the way, O Calcutta and Hair, the first Broadway musicals to feature full nudity by the actors. That was considered kind of risque at first, but then they both enjoyed long runs, both won awards. So all the mores began to change. When you change the meaning of the very act that God has designed to create new human life through the marital act, you're changing up all of humanity. You're going to have major systemic problems that have to do with stability in family life. And the predictions that Paul VI made in 1968 have been vindicated, from the fact that he said that governments would step in and begin limiting the number of children that can be born per family. That foresaw what would happen in China. He said the man would lose respect for the woman. That'd be a massive change-up in the relationship between men and women. And in the end, it only took 7 years, from 65 to really 72, when Roe v. Wade was decided. Another thing that happened in 1965 that relates to Roe v. Wade is the Supreme Court decision Griswold versus Connecticut. Estelle Griswold was a director of Planned Parenthood, and until 1965, it was illegal to sell and advertise contraception, various devices. They were called the Comstock Laws, passed by a Protestant lawmaker named Anthony Comstock. And in 1965, that Griswold versus Connecticut decision found this magical, mystical thing called the right to privacy. Now, the right to privacy does not exist in the Bill of Rights. You cannot read it in the U.S. Constitution. But these unelected black-robed lawyers found it in a penumbra, they said. The penumbra is like the glowing emanation during a solar eclipse around the moon. In other words, it's the gist of the thing. So there it is. The Supreme Court in 1965 found a right to privacy to justify contraception. That was the precedent that the Thurgood Marshall 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court used as a fulcrum. That was the precedent to allow the legalization of abortion. the answer to abortion is not better birth control, it's no birth control, no contraception. Contraception is the theory, abortion is the practice. When you've already decided in principle that you're going to sabotage your sex life so that no babies will result, when the babies that do result, there's no such thing as perfect contraception, then you need a fail-safe. You need a backup plan. And that backup plan is better known as abortion. So is this teaching in the Bible at all? Well, it turns out it's there implicitly from Genesis to Revelation, because the Bible is pro-life. The Bible is pro-sex. There's no more elevated and appreciative vision of human sexuality than there is in the teaching of the Catholic Church. The Catholic sexual ethic leads to human flourishing. So what about the first commandment? The first commandment most people think of as, I am the Lord your God, thou shalt have no other gods besides me, the first commandment. But the real first commandment predates Exodus. It's in the first chapter of Genesis. Genesis 1:27. Genesis 1:27 is, in shorthand, just do it. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That's what God says to our first parents. That's not a suggestion. That is a divine commandment. Be fruitful and multiply. Then he says it again in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1, to Noah and his family. Then he repeats it again in Genesis 35, verse 11. He says that to Abraham and his family. So the Bible is pro-life and pro-love and pro-sex. Sex is God's idea, and God is a genius. So what contraception does, it enters into that two-in-one union, and it says basically, I don't give myself to you. I play act. One of the ironies of the feminist movement that promoted birth control as a kind of panacea for women's problems and would lead to the liberation of women has actually enslaved women. Contraception, especially the birth control pill, has made women into elaborate masturbation tools. Paul VI was right. The man would lose respect for the woman. He would see in her as an object of lust. Even Sigmund Freud said this as early as 1921. Sigmund Freud, atheist, Jewish father of psychoanalysis, was against birth control because he said, you can tell what a sexual perversion is when it sets aside reproduction as an aim. Mahatma Gandhi, Hindu nonviolent leader who was killed in 1948, said that contraception makes men into beasts, turns them into beings of lust that use women. So the teaching is not a Catholic dogma. So this teaching is not a matter of God arbitrarily saying it's wrong. It's wrong because it goes against human nature. It takes the two-in-one flesh act and manipulates it so that instead of an act of self-giving and sharing in the adventure called parenthood, it sets up mirrors between each partner. It becomes a selfish act of lust instead of a self-donating act of love. The porn industry would never have gotten out of first gear if it weren't for contraception. Because once you decide that babies do not have to be part of sexual congress, then any kind of perversion is open to fair game. How could you argue against masturbation or homosexual behavior if you've already said that contraception is okay? The logic here is inexorable. So where is it in the Bible? I mentioned the first commandment, just do it, in Genesis in those three passages. It's also in Psalm 127, where happy is the man whose quiver is full. The children are always seen as a blessing. Sterility is always seen as a curse. But the granddaddy of all Bible passages is in Genesis chapter 38. And this is the one that Catholic popes have appealed to. And this is really the heart of Protestant objections to contraception. I'll just start in here with after verse 1. So Genesis 38, 1 through 10. I won't read all the genealogy stuff. So I'll just start around verse 4. Again, his mother conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. So here's the star of the story, Onan. Onan's mother again bore a son. She called his name Shelah. She was in Chizi when she bore him, and Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn. So this is the sons of Judah, the patriarch. This is where we get the word Jew, from Judah. Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. So you have the youngest, Shelah. You have the middle child, Onan. It's always the middle child. Then you have the firstborn. And Er's wife's name's Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. We'll get to that in a minute. Why did the Lord slay Then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother. So this is called the law of the levirate. When someone who is married dies, the brother of that someone would have intercourse with his widow and continue the family line. This is what Judah is asking of Onan. So here's what happens. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So when he went into his brother's wife, he spilled his semen upon the ground. Sometimes it says, spilled the seed upon the ground, lest he should give offspring to his brother. Here's the magic line. This is verse 10. And what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and he slew him also. The also is a reference to Chances are good, say a lot of rabbinical commentators, that sin was also the sin of contraception. So this is serious. This is not a light, trivial thing. Now, Catholic dissenters, and I argued this way when I was a dissenter, the belief is, well, wait a second, what's being punished here is just stinginess. The brother is selfish, he wants to have sex with her without the baby, and he ejaculates on the ground because he's kind of a selfish jerk, he's a narcissist. However, the Bible also tells us what the punishment for that is. You can read about it in Deuteronomy chapter 25. Basically, it's a ritual of humiliation where the defrauded widow gets to spit in the face and throw a shoe at the ne'er-do-well brother-in-law who's violating this law of the levirate. But that's not what happens here. What happens here is that it's not that Onan decided not to, or he disobeyed his father. No, he used Tamar for his own sexual pleasure, and he deliberately withdrew. He didn't allow the act to go to its full completion. So he defrauded the father and God and the older late brother. There's no mention here of his subjective intentions, his feelings, his reasoning, nothing like that. It's what he did, the objective quality of the act. And that's what delivered the death penalty. Now, Joseph, the patriarch Joseph, in the next chapter, chapter 39 of Genesis, we read that Joseph is the favorite son of his father, Jacob. His mother, Rachel, if she had a contraceptive mentality after all these kids, after Joseph, she has another baby, and that baby is Benjamin. If she hadn't had Benjamin, our New Testament would be very, very thin, because St. Paul tells us in the letter to the Romans that he's a proud member of the tribe of Benjamin. The reason this is important is that you can apply it to yourself. Your decision to contracept affects your family tree from this day forward. You're not just affecting your own marriage by contracepting. You're affecting your family tree by preventing the coming to be of a new human being. You're not killing off some pre-existent soul. That's Platonism. Catholic Church does not accept that. At conception, God does something that he's not done since the creation of the universe, and that is he makes something from nothing. He directly intervenes in the sex act to create the soul. And the body and the soul as a composite make up you and me. The only difference between you and me and the day of our conception is time, charm, and the way we eat and breathe. There's great continuity between us at conception and us in the present moment. So there's a lot going on behind the teaching against contraception. It's not only a teaching against the act, it's also a teaching on behalf of true romance. If you read Humanae Vitae, and I'll put the link in there, you can get a free copy. It's very short, 31 paragraphs, as I mentioned. You'll see in there an ode to true love, that love is faithful, that it's human, that it's total, and that it's fecund, it's life-giving, it's fertile. The two-in-one flesh means literally that the mother and the father, in their invisible love for one another, becomes incarnate in the child. Mind-blowingly profound. So there's a lot at stake. In the next video, I'm going to talk about natural law, and then eventually we'll get to the difference between natural family planning, which the church condones if you have a serious or just reason to avoid pregnancy. I look forward to hearing your comments. Weigh in if you've never heard this teaching explained, if you want to hear more. Above all, I'd love to hear your objections. What do you think's wrong with this teaching? If you join Coffin Nation, you can get cool swag. We have mugs, cool stuff. And this book, which I wrote as a love letter to the teaching, The Contraception Deception, Catholic Teaching on Birth Control, is now on sale to honor the anniversary of Humanae Vitae. It's life-giving information. It can transform your marriage. The correlation between couples who are faithful to the Catholic sexual ethic and low divorce rate is undeniable. There's lots of social science data that proves that. Subscribe to coffinnation.com. Might be something for you. And in the meantime, be a saint. What else is there?